Who let the caterer wander into the ballroom? Genevieve Sloane's voice cut through the ambient hum of Los Angeles's elite society like a diamond through glass, precise, intentional, and designed to leave a mark. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments below. The words were casual enough to maintain plausible deniability, yet sharp enough to draw attention. It was a tone she had spent decades perfecting, one that pretended not to court attention while simultaneously commanding it. The Pacific Summit Gala sparkled beneath the soaring glass atrium of the Fairmont Century Plaza. Light fractured through crystal chandeliers and danced across the white marble floor where the city's wealthiest and most influential figures mingled. The air was infused with notes of white florals, aged cognac, and the particular perfume of power, something both intangible and unmistakable to those who breathed it regularly. A senator laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't particularly funny. A film director gestured expansively as he described his next project to potential investors. A celebrated surgeon moved from group to group, his presence acknowledged with the subtle deference reserved for those who hold lives in their hands. Each interaction was a complex negotiation of status, a series of micro-expressions and verbal cues that signaled one's position in the intricate social hierarchy. Genevieve's gaze remained fixed on a man who stood near the guest registry. He wore dark jeans that had clearly known better days, paired with a simple black t-shirt that hung loosely from his shoulders. His worn sneakers seemed to apologize to the marble floors beneath them. No tuxedo like the other men. No gleaming cufflinks or silk pocket square. Nothing that would suggest he belonged among the Cartier watches and custom Tom Ford suits that populated the room. Her soft laughter followed her comment, a delicate, calculated sound that invited others to join her in quiet derision. She wasn't seeking a response so much as confirmation of the social hierarchy she'd spent her life defending. The boundaries between who belonged and who served needed constant reinforcement, after all. But the man in black didn't even look up. His apparent obliviousness to her barbs somehow made it worse. Indifference was the one response Genevieve had never learned to counter. The Pacific Summit Gala wasn't merely an event, it was a complex ecosystem where worth was announced through calculated signals. The car you arrived in. The cause you championed. The table you were assigned. These weren't accidents but careful choreography, a dance of status that everyone understood but nobody acknowledged. Designer gowns whispered like smoke across polished floors. Bow ties were straightened more frequently than moral compasses. Genevieve had arrived draped in silver silk couture that caught the light with every calculated movement. The neckline was architectural, sharp angles framing a diamond pendant whose value could fund a small non-profit for a year. As heiress to a media empire that had shaped public opinion for generations, she had never purchased a ticket in her life. Rooms like this belonged to her by birthright. After making her initial rounds, air kisses exchanged with board members, champagne flute accepted from a tray without acknowledgement of the server's existence, she was escorted to her designated seat at Table 1. The placement was no accident. Table 1 was positioned directly before the stage, reserved for platinum benefactors and those whose names were synonymous with influence. As she approached, her eyes narrowed slightly. Beside a place card marked only Guest Platinum Benefactor sat the same stranger from earlier. The man in the black t-shirt. His presence at Table 1 caused her step to falter momentarily before she recovered with a smile that was less an expression of joy than a declaration of intent. No cufflinks? Genevieve said as she took her seat beside him, her voice honeyed with false concern. Bold choice. The man glanced up briefly. His eyes met hers for just a moment, dark, unreadable, and possessing a stillness that seemed alien in this room of constant performance. He nodded once, acknowledging her presence but offering nothing more, before returning his attention to the program in his hands. His silence was disorienting. In Genevieve's world, silence was a luxury afforded only to those at the very top of the hierarchy. Everyone else scrambled to fill it with agreement, with flattery, with nervous laughter, anything to avoid the void. His comfort with quiet felt like an unearned privilege. She leaned in slightly, her voice low and intimate, as if sharing a confidence. "I don't mean to offend. It's just, rare. To see someone so committed to comfort at an event where even the champagne wears a label." He sipped his water. The glass was crystal like everyone else's, but he held it differently, without the self-conscious performativity that characterized most gestures in the room. His hand didn't announce its manicure or draw attention to the absence of a wedding band. It simply lifted the glass, served its purpose, and returned it to the table. She observed him with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a lifetime deciphering social cues. His posture was relaxed yet dignified, suggesting familiarity with formal settings without any apparent need to prove his belonging. There was something almost meditative about his presence, as if he existed within his own center of gravity while the rest of the room orbited around external validation. Most people, she continued when it became clear he wouldn't respond, spend weeks preparing for an event like this. Tailors, stylists, media coaches. It's practically an industry unto itself. She gave a delicate laugh. The irony being, of course, that the goal is to appear effortless. Genevieve tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against her champagne flute, the soft ting acting as punctuation to the silence she was determined to break. "I admire that, actually. Confidence, or oblivion, it's such a fine line, isn't it?" Still nothing. This wasn't how the script was supposed to unfold. Genevieve wasn't accustomed to silence. She was accustomed to surrender, to watching people squirm under her attention, eager to please, desperate to align themselves with her perception. The man's indifference felt like a small rebellion, and small rebellions had a way of spreading if not quickly contained. Around them, the gala continued its carefully orchestrated dance. Waitstaff moved with practiced invisibility. Photographers captured strategic moments that would appear in society pages the following morning. The auction items, experiences and artworks curated to extract maximum donations from competitive egos, were displayed on illuminated pedestals along the perimeter of the room. As the live auction began, the tension around table 1 grew thicker than the velvet drapes framing the ballroom windows. The auctioneer's practiced cadence echoed through the space, each bid a public testament to generosity, or at least the appearance of it. Laughter fluttered around the table, forced and flighty, as guests pretended the astronomical sums being pledged were casual expenditures rather than calculated investments in social capital. A tech magnate at the far end of the table raised his paddle for a weekend at a private island resort, $75,000. His wife touched his arm with practiced affection, a gesture Genevieve had seen countless times across countless galas. A hedge fund manager countered with $85,000, his eyes darting around the room to ensure his generosity had witnesses. This was the dance she knew so well. Philanthropy as performance art, with tax deductions as the encore. She had choreographed similar moments herself, strategically selecting which items to bid on based not on her interest in the offering but on who else was likely to bid and what narrative she wished to create about herself. Genevieve leaned toward the man beside her again, her voice pitched just loud enough for others at the table to overhear. "Perhaps this year's theme is radical authenticity," she offered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though I suppose the dress code memo got lost in translation." The words hung in the air between them like smoke, waiting to be either fanned into flame or dispersed. Several guests at the table shifted uncomfortably. A woman with a British accent suddenly became intensely interested in rearranging her silverware. A tech CEO with whom Genevieve had shared a panel at Davos the previous year pretended to receive an urgent message on his phone. The man in black didn't react. Instead, he simply raised his auction paddle, a calm, deliberate motion, placing a $100,000 bid on a painting by a reclusive New York artist whose work had recently been featured at MoMA. The canvas was a study in controlled chaos, layers of color and texture that seemed to both invite and reject interpretation. Genevieve blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Then she let out a soft, theatrical laugh. "That's brave," she said. "Or wildly optimistic." Someone at the table chuckled nervously. Another guest stared intently into their wine glass, as if seeking refuge in its depths. Let us know you're still here with us by dropping a number 3 in the comments below. The auctioneer acknowledged the bid and moved to close the lot when the man in black raised his paddle again, increasing his offer without being challenged. His expression remained unchanged, betraying neither excitement nor concern at the commitment of substantial funds. "Sold," the auctioneer declared with theatrical finality, bringing down his gavel with a crack that seemed to reverberate through Genevieve's composure. She leaned closer to the man, her voice almost tender now, though the sharpness remained beneath the surface like a blade wrapped in silk. "If you need help covering that," she offered with exquisite condescension, "we do have a donor support fund. For those who find their enthusiasm exceeds their resources." Finally, he looked at her directly. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't even amused. It held something far more destabilizing, a complete absence of the need for her approval. And then, with absolute composure, he said, "I think I'll be fine." 5 words. Like a surgeon's scalpel. Precise. Deep. Clean. Genevieve felt the first crack in her carefully constructed facade. Not because the words themselves were particularly clever or cutting, but because they came from a place she couldn't quite identify, a place beyond the game she had mastered. He wasn't playing defense or offense. He wasn't playing at all. The sensation was foreign and deeply unsettling. Throughout her life, she had categorized people as either threats to be neutralized or assets to be cultivated. This man refused to be either. He existed outside her carefully constructed taxonomy, and that made him dangerous in a way she couldn't articulate. Minutes later, the lights dimmed throughout the ballroom. Conversations hushed to a murmur, then faded entirely as a spotlight illuminated the marble steps at the far end of the space. Governor Cole, the night's honorary chair, emerged from the shadows. His silver hair caught the light as he made his way to the stage with the practiced confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in the public eye. He approached the microphone, offering the crowd a warm smile that had won him elections and diffused countless political crises. "Tonight has been extraordinary," he began, his voice filling the space with practiced authority. "Together, we've surpassed $12 million in pledges for children's education and healthcare initiatives. But none of this, not the venue, not the auction, not even the very foundation we're celebrating tonight, would be possible without one quiet force behind the curtain." Genevieve straightened in her chair, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her gown. This was it. Her moment. She had chaired this event for 3 consecutive years, had personally secured half the auction items, had leveraged her media connections to ensure coverage in all the right publications. Recognition wasn't why she did it, of course, that's what she told the reporters. But recognition was the invisible currency that fueled rooms like this, and she had invested heavily. "A man who never asked for his name in lights," Governor Cole continued. "A co-founder of the very foundation this gala supports. A man whose silent generosity has rebuilt schools, funded breakthrough cancer research, and tonight, secured our future with a matching pledge that doubles everything we've raised." A pause stretched across the room, pregnant with anticipation. "Please welcome my friend, our patron, Mr. Keanu Reeves." The reaction rippled through the ballroom like a stone dropped in still water. Gasps. Audible. Some choked back in surprise, others escaping involuntarily. Cameras turned. Heads whipped around. Applause thundered from all corners of the room, starting hesitantly, then building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers. And beside her, the man in the plain black t-shirt rose slowly from his chair. Still calm. Still silent. But no longer invisible. Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, nodded in acknowledgement of the applause, his expression suggesting he found the attention unnecessary rather than insufficient. He moved with the same quiet confidence he had displayed all evening, making his way to the stage without hurry or hesitation. Genevieve stared up at him, her face frozen in a practiced smile that couldn't quite find its foundation. The muscles that had spent decades crafting expressions of perfectly calibrated emotion now seemed to be operating independently of her control. Her mind raced to recalibrate, to find some way to rewrite the narrative of the evening that would preserve her position. The man she had dismissed as an interloper, the man she had mocked as out of place, was the man who had built the stage beneath her feet. The irony was too perfect, too cinematic in its execution. If it had been scripted, she would have called it heavy-handed. But reality had no obligation to subtlety. Keanu shook the governor's hand beneath a rain of flashbulbs and unrestrained admiration. The room that had always bent toward Genevieve's gravity now oriented itself entirely around him, leaving her stranded in a sudden vacuum of relevance. And she, who had always commanded attention in every room, was suddenly, terrifyingly invisible. Keanu said a few quiet words into the microphone. No grand speech. Just a brief acknowledgement of the cause, a thanks to those who had contributed, and a gentle reminder that the true purpose of the evening was not celebration but action. Then he returned, with the same unhurried pace, to the seat beside her. To the place she had insisted he didn't belong. He didn't even glance her way as he sat down. Not out of rudeness or retribution, but because his attention was simply elsewhere, focused on the next speaker, a young woman who had benefited from one of the Foundation's educational programs and now attended Stanford on a full scholarship. A waiter silently placed dessert before each guest at table 1. A delicate confection of spun sugar perched atop creme fraiche like a crown on a crumbling throne. The sugar had been pulled into impossibly thin strands that caught the light and transformed it into edible gold. Genevieve stared at it. For the first time in her adult life, she had lost her appetite for both food and attention. Around her, conversation resumed, flowing like water around a suddenly insignificant stone. Not with her. Over her. Past her. The tech CEO who usually sought her approval now leaned the other way, engaged in animated discussion with a film producer. Countess Delacroix, who had once studied Genevieve's gestures like a disciple seeking illumination, now whispered intimately with a gallery owner from Brooklyn. No one was cruel. They were worse. They were courteous. They maintained all the superficial trappings of respect while withdrawing the substance. It was the social equivalent of bloodletting, death by 1,000 tiny cuts that individually seemed harmless. Genevieve reached for her wine. Her hand trembled slightly, causing ripples across the surface of the ruby liquid. The tremor was imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but to her, it might as well have been a seismic event. Control over her body, her emotions, her surroundings, had always been her North Star. Now that star was flickering. She could feel the shift in the room's energy like a barometric change before a storm. This wasn't simply about being outshone at a single event. This was about the fracturing of a carefully constructed identity. For decades, she had cultivated the image of the woman who knew everything worth knowing, who could place anyone in their proper social context within moments of meeting them. Her ability to categorize and classify the world around her wasn't just a skill, it was the foundation upon which she had built her sense of self. And in a single evening, that foundation had revealed itself to be sand rather than stone. He glanced sideways at Keanu. He sat with a calm that seemed both innate and carefully cultivated, like a bonsai tree that appears effortlessly natural while bearing the invisible marks of decades of intentional shaping. He hadn't gloated. Hadn't retaliated. Hadn't seemed to notice her discomfort at all. Let us know you're still here with us by dropping a number 3 in the comments below. And somehow, that stung more than any direct confrontation would have. He had never needed to win because he was never playing her game to begin with. She'd brought stilettos to a silent war, and found herself disarmed by the absence of battle altogether. That was unexpected, she said after several minutes of silence, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the gala. The words were directed as much to herself as to him. He looked over at her then. His eyes held no malice, no triumph, no satisfaction at her discomfort. Just the same stillness that had disconcerted her all evening. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room, he said gently, is the one that doesn't speak. Then he turned away again, responding to a question from someone across the table about the Foundation's next initiative in rural education. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of performative social rituals that suddenly seemed both exhausting and transparent. Genevieve moved through them on autopilot, her body executing the familiar patterns while her mind remained trapped in an endless loop of re-examination. Hands were shaken. Business cards exchanged. Promises to do lunch offered with practiced insincerity. But the automation that had once felt like mastery now felt like imprisonment. Later, long after the applause had died and the lights had softened to a dim afterglow, Genevieve found herself standing alone in the hallway leading to the restrooms. A full-length mirror hung on the wall, framed in ornate gold that spoke of old wealth and established taste. She caught sight of her reflection and paused, suddenly transfixed by the image before her. Same silver gown that had been hand-stitched by artisans in a Parisian atelier. Same diamond pendant that had once belonged to a minor European royal. Same posture she had perfected over decades of moving through spaces designed to intimidate. But the reflection staring back at her seemed like a stranger caught in an act of impersonation. The careful makeup couldn't quite conceal the fatigue that had settled around her eyes, not physical exhaustion, but something deeper, more existential. How long had she been tired without allowing herself to acknowledge it? How many years had she spent maintaining a facade that had come to feel more like a prison than a privilege? She remembered her mother's voice from decades earlier, "People will forget what you said, Genevieve, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." At the time, she had interpreted it as strategic advice, a blueprint for building influence through emotional manipulation. Now, standing before her reflection in a quiet hallway while a man in worn sneakers commanded the respect of everyone she had ever sought to impress, she wondered if her mother had meant something else entirely. Not because of what Keanu had said. Not even because of what he represented. But because of what she hadn't seen until this moment, staring at herself beneath the forgiving glow of vintage sconces. Power wasn't pearls or property or even pedigree. Influence wasn't posture or pronunciation or practiced disdain. And silence could be deafening when it came from a place of genuine security rather than strategic withdrawal. She pulled out her phone. Notifications blinked like small accusations. Did you know who he was? Was that really Keanu Reeves at your table? Why didn't you say something? The questions all circled the same premise, that she should have recognized him, should have treated him differently based on his status rather than his appearance. But wasn't that precisely the error in the other direction? To assign worth based on external markers rather than inherent value? She turned off the screen. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to really look at what she had become, not the carefully curated image she projected, but the reality beneath it. The constant calculation. The exhausting vigilance. the fear masked as superiority. When she finally returned to the ballroom, Keanu was still there. The entire room now moved around him like planets around a sun, drawn by a gravity that had nothing to do with demand and everything to do with genuine presence. She watched from the shadow of a massive floral arrangement, this time, truly unseen. And for the first time in her adult life, Genevieve Sloane didn't want to walk back into the center of attention. Not because she wasn't invited, but because she no longer knew who she was in that room when stripped of the armor of superiority she had worn for so long. Her gaze drifted to other faces in the crowd. How many of them were performing roles rather than living authentically? How many had constructed elaborate narratives about their own importance that might collapse under the weight of a single unexpected encounter? The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting, the possibility that she wasn't alone in her carefully constructed facade. If this story made you pause, reflect or feel something, drop a 6 in the comments. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. She declined with a small shake of her head, surprised by her own refusal. She had always used champagne as a prop, a way to occupy her hands and punctuate her conversations with delicate sips that never progressed to actual intoxication. Tonight, she wanted clarity. Needed it, even. From across the room, she spotted Martin Chen, the tech billionaire whose table was always adjacent to hers at these events. He caught her eye and offered a small, uncertain nod. Was it her imagination, or was there something different in his acknowledgement? A reassessment, perhaps. A recalibration of her place in the room's complex hierarchy. The thought would have devastated her hours earlier. Now, it felt almost like relief. Her phone vibrated in her clutch with another notification. She ignored it. Outside, the Los Angeles night sprawled before her like an unwritten page. Valets rushed to retrieve luxury vehicles. Drivers stood at attention beside black SUVs. The machinery of privilege continued its seamless operation. Genevieve walked past her waiting car, ignoring the confused expression of her driver as she continued down the street. The cool night air against her skin felt like permission to breathe differently. Her heels clicked against the pavement in a rhythm that seemed to ask questions with each step. Who would she be without the weight of expectations she had carried for so long? What would it feel like to enter a room without immediately assessing its power dynamics? Was there liberation in anonymity? She had no answers yet. But for the first time in decades, she was asking different questions. And perhaps that was its own kind of beginning. As she walked, memories from her childhood surfaced unbidden, moments before her identity had become so inextricably linked with status and perception. A summer afternoon spent reading beneath an oak tree at her family's estate, lost in a world of imagination rather than calculation. The genuine laughter she had shared with a college roommate before understanding that genuine connection and strategic networking were supposedly different things. The last time she had felt rain on her face without worrying about what it would do to her appearance. If this story made you pause, reflect or feel something, drop a 6 in the comments. When had it all changed? When had the performance become so seamless that she had forgotten it was a performance at all? There was no single moment she could pinpoint, just a slow accretion of choices and compromises that had hardened around her like amber, preserving a version of herself that felt increasingly foreign. Behind her, the Fairmont Century Plaza continued to glow against the night sky, a temple to a particular kind of influence she had worshipped her entire life. Inside, a man in a simple black t-shirt had demonstrated a different kind of power, one that couldn't be inherited or purchased or performed. Sometimes, the ones we dismiss are the ones who carry the most weight in their silence. Sometimes, the ones we try to diminish are the ones who show us the true measure of ourselves. And sometimes, a single evening can crack open decades of certainty, letting in just enough light to illuminate the possibility of change. Have you ever misjudged someone and regretted it later? Comment 1 if you've seen someone being misjudged based on appearances. Comment 2 if you've been that person yourself.